The grand hall of the Zernak's royal palace was filled with alien dignitaries from across the galaxy. It was the most important event of the year, a ceremony that celebrated the strength and unity of the Zernak's empire. The vast room shimmered with golden lights, and the scent of alien flowers filled the air. Hundreds of beings from various star systems stood in awe of their queen. Lavera, Marcus, a young human guard, stood at the edge of the room, watching the ceremony unfold. He was nervous, unsure of his place among such powerful beings. His job was simple: stand still, keep quiet, and make sure nothing went wrong. It was hard to believe that he, a lowly human, had been given the honor to guard such an important event. The Zernak's queen, Lavara, was known throughout the galaxy for her beauty, wisdom, and strength. Her regal armor glimmered in the light as she entered the hall, her presence commanding the attention of everyone in the room. The crowd parted to make way for her, and she walked with the confidence of someone who had ruled for centuries. Her sharp, golden eyes scanned the room, settling on the humans standing at the edges. Marcus felt a wave of nervousness wash over him as her gaze fell on him, straightened up, trying to look as professional as possible. But no matter how hard he tried, he still felt out of place. After all, he was just a human guard. He didn't belong among these highly advanced beings. The ceremony began with speeches, and the guests watched in awe as the queen addressed the crowd in her powerful voice. Marcus stood silently, but his mind began to wander. He couldn't help but admire the grandness of the event and the people around him. It was like something out of a dream, and he felt incredibly small in comparison to the galaxy's most powerful species. But as he stood there, deep in thought, his foot slipped on the smooth floor. He tried to regain his balance, but it was too late. His boots scraped across the polished floor, making an awful noise. The sound echoed throughout the hall, and the room went silent. Marcus froze, mortified. He had made a mistake in front of everyone. And not just anyone. He had made a fool of himself in front of Queen Lavera. His face turned bright red as he stared at the floor, trying to disappear into the shadows. Lavara's eyes narrowed as she turned to face him. The room was so quiet now that Marcus could hear his own heartbeat. The queen stepped forward, her gaze fixed on him. Everyone in the room was watching. "How dare you make such a noise during my ceremony, human?" Lavara's voice was sharp, and it cut through the silence like a knife. "Do you not know how to behave in the presence of your betters?" The insult hit Marcus like a punch to the stomach. He had never felt so small in his life. Tried to say something, but no words came out. The queen's gaze was like fire, and it burned through him. "You are nothing," Lavera continued, her voice cold and cruel. "A mere human who thinks he can stand in the presence of royalty. You are lucky to be here at all. Remember your place, guard." The crowd murmured in response to the queen's harsh words, and Marcus felt the weight of their judgment. They all agreed with her. After all, who was he to be standing there? He was just a humana species considered weak and insignificant compared to the mighty Zernaks. His hands trembled as he stood there, staring at the floor, unable to look up. He could feel his face burning with embarrassment, but he couldn't bring himself to leave. It was his duty to stay in position. But all he wanted to do was run away and disappear from the queen's sight. Lavara turned her back on him, as if he were nothing more than a passing annoyance. She continued with the ceremony, but the sting of her words stayed with Marcus. The rest of the event passed in a blur for him. He couldn't focus on the speeches or the music. All he could think about was how he had embarrassed himself in front of the queen and the entire galaxy. He had failed, and he would never live it down. The ceremony eventually ended, and the guests began to leave. Marcus stood where he was, lost in his thoughts, unsure of what to do next. He knew he couldn't stay here forever, but the thought of facing the queen again made his stomach turn. He had been humiliated in front of everyone, and there was no way to take back what had happened. As the crowd thinned, Marcus finally moved. He walked slowly, his head down, and exited the hall. The palace's halls were quiet now, the sounds of laughter and music replaced by the soft echo of his footsteps. He made his way to his quarters, trying to push the shame away. The queen's words echoed in his mind, playing over and over again. "You are nothing. It felt like a brand seared into his brain, but he couldn't allow it to consume him. He had to be strong. He had to hold his head high, even if it felt impossible. Sitting down on the edge of his bed, Marcus ran his hands through his hair, trying to shake off the feeling of humiliation. The sting was still there, but he knew one thing for sure. He would not let the Queen's words define him. He was human, and no matter how much she or anyone else might try to put him down, he would rise above it. Tomorrow was another day, and he would face it with the same determination that had gotten him this far. He might be a simple guard, but he was still a person, someone worthy of respect, no matter what anyone said. The following days were a blur for Marcus. Went through his duties as a guard, but his mind was heavy with the memory of Queen Lavara's words. "You are nothing." The insult echoed in his mind every time he walked through the palace halls. Every time he looked at the alien dignitaries who passed by him with eyes filled with judgment. His position, once a source of pride, now felt like a punishment. He tried to focus on his work, to keep his mind busy so he wouldn't dwell on the humiliation. But it was difficult. The other guards treated him with the same cold distance that the Queen had shown. The other species who were part of the Empire whispered among themselves, their eyes often glancing in his direction. He could feel their gaze, a mixture of curiosity and disdain. One evening, after a long day of standing guard at the royal garden, Marcus found himself wandering through the palace corridors. He had hoped that some fresh air might clear his mind, but the thoughts of his humiliation followed him like a shadow. He needed to find peace, or at least some form of distraction. As he turned a corner, he heard the soft sound of footsteps ahead. He paused, his heart skipping a beat when he recognized the figure walking toward him. It was Queen Lavara, her tall, regal form draped in flowing robes that sparkled under the palace lights. She didn't seem to notice him at first, her head bent as she walked in deep thought. For a moment, Marcus considered stepping aside, pretending he hadn't seen her. But before he could move, the Queen looked up and caught his gaze. Her golden eyes met his, and he instantly felt a wave of unease. "Guard," she said, her voice surprisingly gentle this time. It was nothing like the cutting words she had spoken. During the ceremony, Marcus stood still, unsure of what to say. Was she going to insult him again? But Lavara simply paused before him, her expression softening. I need to speak with you," she said, her voice a little quieter now. Marcus hesitated. He had never imagined that the Queen, the most powerful being in the galaxy, would seek him out for a conversation. But he nodded, not trusting his own voice to speak. They stood in silence for a moment, the sounds of the distant palace filling the air. "Follow me," the Queen instructed, turning and walking down the corridor. Marcus didn't know what else to do but follow her. She led him to a small private balcony that overlooked the vast gardens below. The stars above twinkled, brightly casting a soft glow over everything. It was a peaceful sight. But Marcus couldn't shake the tension that hung in the air between them. Lavara finally turned to him, her eyes searching his face, as if looking for something. "I owe you an apology," she said, her voice softer than before. Marcus blinked in surprise. An apology? He had never expected the Queen to admit her mistake, much less ask for forgiveness. But there was something about the way she spoke that made him realize she wasn't just saying the words because she had to. There was sincerity in her tone. "I was wrong to insult you," Lavara continued, her voice quiet and thoughtful. "Was a moment of weakness. I let my pride get the better of me." She paused for a moment, looking out at the stars, as if searching for something in the vastness of space. "I have spent so many years ruling with power, with control, that I forgot what it was like to be ... vulnerable." Marcus stood still, processing her words. He never imagined the Queen would speak so openly about her own struggles. He had only ever seen her as a distant figure, someone above him, unreachable. But now she was standing in front of him, showing a side of herself that he had never expected. "I used my sharp words to keep others at a distance," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "to prevent anyone from seeing the weakness inside me. But in doing so, I hurt you. A person who didn't deserve it. Marcus swallowed hard, his heart racing. He'd never heard anyone speak like this, especially not someone as powerful as Queen Lavara. The walls she had built around herself were crumbling, and in their place. There was something new, a raw honesty he hadn't anticipated. I am sorry for what I said, Lavara added, her eyes now meeting his again. You did nothing wrong. You were simply doing your duty, and I lashed out at you for no reason. The words hung in the air between them, and Marcus felt a weight lifting from his shoulders. He didn't know what to say at first. The apology was unexpected, but it was real. It was more than he had ever hoped for. It's all right, Your Majesty, Marcus said, his voice steady, despite the swirl of emotions inside him. You were only doing what you thought was right. Lavara shook her head, a small smile tugging at the corner of her lips. No, Marcus. I was wrong. She paused, her gaze softening. But I hope you can forgive me. Marcus looked at her, the powerful queen who had once made him feel so small, and now stood before him as a person, vulnerable and seeking forgiveness. He didn't need to think twice. There's nothing to forgive, Your Majesty, Marcus said, his voice filled with sincerity. We all make mistakes. The queen nodded, her expression softening further. Thank you, she said quietly. Thank you for showing me that not everything can be fixed with power. For the first time, Marcus saw the queen in a new light. She was not just a ruler, but a person who, like him, was learning and growing. The barriers between them had begun to fall, and in their place was something much more meaningful: understanding. Lavara turned toward the stars once more, her gaze distant. Perhaps we both have more to learn than we think, she mused. Marcus smiled slightly, feeling a sense of peace that he hadn't felt since the ceremony. Perhaps. The two of them stood together in silence, watching the stars in the quiet of the night. And for the first time, Marcus didn't feel like an outsider. He didn't feel small. In that moment, they were simply two people, standing together under the stars, each with their own burdens, but learning to understand one another. The next few days felt different for Marcus. As he went about his duties as a guard, the usual weight of discomfort was no longer there. Queen Lavara's apology had somehow lifted a burden he didn't even realize he was carrying. Every time he passed by her in the palace halls, he no longer felt like an outsider. There was a quiet understanding between them now, one that hadn't existed before. Lavara, too, seemed changed. The harsh, almost cold queen he had once feared now appeared more approachable. When she walked the halls, she no longer wore the unshakable mask of authority that kept others at a distance. It was as if the walls she had built around herself had started to crumble, and Marcus couldn't help but notice the subtle shift in her demeanor. She wasn't just a ruler anymore. She was a person, just like him. Despite this, Marcus knew that nothing had really changed in the grand scheme of things. He was still a guard, and she was still the queen. There were lines that couldn't be crossed, and he didn't expect that to change. But that didn't stop him from feeling a sense of peace. The tension that had once existed between them had dissolved, replaced by something more real. One evening, as the sun began to set and the sky outside the palace turned a deep shade of purple, Marcus was assigned to his usual post. The courtyard was quiet, with only the soft rustle of leaves in the wind and the occasional sound of distant voices echoing through the halls. Marcus stood still, his mind wandering as he looked out at the vast gardens below. He was just about to look away when he saw her. Lavara walked toward the balcony overlooking the courtyard. She was alone, her steps light, yet there was a certain grace to her that always caught his attention. The evening light bathed her in a soft glow, making her look almost ethereal. For a moment, Marcus was struck by how different she seemed. She wasn't wearing her regal armor this time, but simple robes that flowed around her like a gentle breeze. Her golden hair, usually pulled tightly into an intricate style, was now loosely gathered, framing her face in a way that made her appear more vulnerable, more human. She stopped just a few steps from him, as if waiting for him to notice her. Marcus wasn't sure what to say at first. It felt strange to be so close to her when just days ago he had been so far removed from her world. "Guard," she said softly, her voice carrying the same weight as it always did, but without the harshness it once held. "How are you?" Marcus didn't expect her to ask, and for a moment he was caught off guard. "I'm well, Your Majesty," he replied, his voice steady, though his heart was beating faster than usual. She smiled slightly, the corners of her mouth lifting in a small, almost sad expression. "You don't have to call me that anymore. You know, after all, you've seen me as I truly am. No more titles between us." Marcus blinked, surprised by her words. He had never imagined his queen would ever suggest such a thing. But she spoke with such sincerity, he could see she meant it. Lavera, Marcus said cautiously, testing the name on his tongue. "It felt strange, but not wrong. I didn't expect you to say that." Lavara looked at him, her eyes softening. "There's no need for the distance anymore, Marcus. Not after everything we've shared. I've spent my life hiding behind my title, behind my armor. I've never had the chance to just be myself, to speak honestly with someone who doesn't expect anything from me other than what I give." She paused, as if searching for the right words. "I've never had a true conversation like the one we had that night." Marcus stood there in silence for a moment, unsure of how to respond. He had never expected to be in this position. He had always seen Lavara as a figure of power, something far beyond his reach. But now, in this moment, standing together on the balcony, it felt as though the walls that had separated them had finally come down. "Why did you decide to speak to me, your Lavara?" Marcus asked, still unsure of how to refer to her. Lavara let out a small laugh, a sound that was lighter than he had ever heard from her before. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about how we're all just trying to find our place in this vast universe. I realize that I don't need to be perfect, that I don't have to be the queen all the time. I've spent so much of my life trying to control everything around me, but it's exhausting. And when you stood there, after I insulted you, you didn't fight back. You didn't cower. You stood tall. And that made me question everything." Marcus didn't know what to say. He had never seen the queen like this, vulnerable, unsure. He had always believed that she was above it all, but now he saw that she, too, had her own struggles, her own moments of doubt. "Lavara, I never thought you were perfect." "No one is," Marcus said, his voice quiet but sincere. "I just wanted to do my job, and I guess I never expected to be treated with respect." She nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I see that now. I treated you as less than you were, and I'm sorry. I've never met anyone who has made me reflect on myself the way you have." For the first time, Marcus saw the queen in a completely different light. She wasn't just the ruler of a vast empire. She was someone who had lived through hardships, someone who had been forced to make tough decisions that often made her appear cold or distant. But in that moment, she wasn't just a queen. She was a person, someone who was capable of growth, of learning. Marcus didn't say anything else. There was nothing more that needed to be said. They both understood each other now. Their paths were still separate, but for the first time, there was mutual respect between them. Lavara looked out at the gardens below, her gaze distant once more. "Maybe one day we'll both find the peace we're looking for." Marcus nodded, a quiet sense of contentment filling him. Maybe. And for the first time, as he stood beside the queen on that balcony, he realized that even the harshest of rulers could change, could grow, and maybe, just maybe, he could help her find that change. The days following their conversation felt lighter for Marcus. He no longer walked through the palace halls with the heavy burden of the queen's insult hanging over him. Instead, he walked with a sense of calm, something he hadn't felt in weeks. Queen Lavara's apology had lifted the weight from his shoulders, and though things hadn't fully changed between them, they felt different in a way he couldn't explain. Marcus continued to carry out his duties with the same diligence as before, but there was a subtle shift in the way he saw the world around him. The alien species, who once looked at him with judgment or indifference, now seemed a bit more human to him. They were not so different from him after all. In their eyes, he could see the same worries, the same fears, the same hopes. He had started to see the galaxy with new eyes, a place where humans, despite their youth and small numbers, had a meaningful role to play. It wasn't just the aliens around him who were changing. Marcus, too, was growing. He was becoming more aware of the power that lay in understanding others, in looking beyond appearances and in finding common ground. The encounter with Queen Lavara had shown him something important. Even the most powerful beings could learn from the simplest of experiences, but it wasn't just his work or his observations that had changed. The way he interacted with Lavara was different now. Their encounters, once awkward and tense, now held a quiet warmth. She was no longer the distant ruler, and he was no longer the mere guard. They were two people, learning about each other in their own quiet way. It happened one afternoon, a few weeks after their conversation on the balcony. Marcus had been assigned to the royal chambers, guarding the hallway just outside the Queen's private quarters. He was standing at attention, his mind focused on the task at hand, when he heard soft footsteps approaching. At first he thought it was one of the palace attendants, but when he looked up, his heart skipped a beat. It was Lavara. She approached him with a small smile, something gentle and real. It was the kind of smile Marcus hadn't seen from her before. She wasn't wearing her armor this time, only a simple robe that made her appear even more approachable than before. "Marcus," she said softly, her voice calm. "Would you join me for a walk?" He blinked, surprised by the invitation. Queen Lavara had never asked him to join her for something so casual. But there was something about the way she asked, gentle, without the usual weight of command, made him nod without hesitation. "Of course, Your Majesty," he replied. Falling into step beside her, they walked slowly through the palace gardens, the sun casting long shadows as the day began to fade. The flowers in the garden bloomed brightly, their colors vibrant against the backdrop of the palace walls. For a while neither of them spoke. They simply enjoyed the peace of the moment. Finally it was Lavara who broke the silence. "You know, Marcus," she said, her eyes fixed on the flowers ahead, "I've spent so much of my life hiding behind my title. I've never really known what it's like to just ... be." Marcus looked at her, puzzled. "What do you mean?" She gave him a small, rueful smile. "I've always been queen. I've always had to live up to expectations, to be perfect, to always be in control. I've never been allowed to make mistakes. I've never been allowed to be ... human." For the first time, Marcus could see the vulnerability in her. He had always known her as the strong, untouchable queen, but now he was beginning to understand the weight of the crown she wore. It wasn't just the political power, it was the loneliness, the isolation, the pressure to never show weakness, to never let anyone see that she was just as human as the rest of them. "I understand," Marcus said softly, his voice steady but filled with understanding. "Sometimes being human means making mistakes. It's what makes us stronger." Lavara turned to him, her golden eyes meeting his, and for a moment they simply stood there, looking at each other. It was an unspoken bond, a shared understanding between two people who had both faced challenges, Lavara with her empire, and Marcus with his own struggle to find his place in the galaxy. "You're right," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I've made many mistakes in my life, but I've also learned from them. And I'm learning now, Marcus, from you." The words took him by surprise. He had never imagined that he, a simple human guard, could teach the mighty queen of the Zernax anything. But there was truth in her words. And for the first time, he felt a deep sense of pride in his own humanity. "Thank you for being honest with me," Marcus replied. "It's not easy for anyone to admit their mistakes, especially not someone in your position." Lavara nodded, her eyes thoughtful. "It's something I've struggled with for a long time, but I'm beginning to see that perhaps being open, being vulnerable, isn't a weakness after all." They continued walking through the gardens, the peace between them growing with every step. For the first time, Marcus felt as though they were no longer separated by the boundaries of their titles. They were just two people, learning from each other and understanding each other in a way that neither had expected. As the sun set, casting a warm glow over the garden, Marcus found himself smiling. It wasn't a smile of victory or triumph, but one of quiet contentment. He had come to realize that the journey he had started when he first set foot on Zernax had been about more than just surviving the insult from the queen. It had been about learning to understand the person behind the title and discovering that even the strongest among them had their own battles to fight. Lavara, too, was learning. She was learning that it was okay to make mistakes, to be imperfect, and to let others in. It was a journey they were both on, and for the first time, Marcus felt as though they were walking that path together. "I think we've both learned a lot from each other," Lavara said, her voice quiet but filled with certainty. Marcus nodded, a smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "I think we have, Your Majesty." But this time he didn't say the words out of duty, said them because he truly meant them. They were not just two people of different species. They were two people, both trying to find their place in a galaxy that was much bigger than they had ever imagined. As the days passed, the bond between Marcus and Lavara deepened. It wasn't just the quiet walks or the moments of shared understanding that changed things. It was the quiet trust that was beginning to grow between them. They didn't speak often, but when they did, there was a new kind of warmth in their words, a warmth that hadn't been there before. Marcus continued his duties as a guard, as he always had, but now there was a sense of purpose behind it. The palace that had once seemed cold and distant now felt more like a place he belonged. The once overbearing, towering walls of the royal court were now filled with moments of connection, small moments, like when Lavara would offer him a brief nod of acknowledgement as she passed by, or when he would find her in the gardens, sitting quietly, her face softened by thoughts of the day. One afternoon, Marcus was assigned to watch over the royal archives, a part of the palace he hadn't explored much. He had always heard stories of how vast and ancient the archives were, filled with records of the Zernax Empire's long history. As he stood at the door, waiting for his shift to start, he couldn't help but feel a sense of curiosity. He had heard Lavara speak of her empire's many triumphs, but he had never seen the records of those victories with his own eyes. Perhaps there was something he could learn, not just about the empire, but about her. As he stepped into the dimly lit room, the air was cool and thick with the smell of ancient paper. The walls were lined with massive bookshelves, each one crammed with documents, scrolls, and holographic records. The quiet stillness of the room felt different from the usual buzz of palace life. This was a place of knowledge, of history, of power, and it was here that Marcus found a deeper understanding of Lavara's role. He had just started to explore one of the older scrolls, when a soft voice interrupted his thoughts. "Are you interested in history, Marcus?" Lavara asked from the doorway. Marcus turned to see the queen standing there, her presence commanding but gentle, as though she was more than just the ruler in that moment. She was a woman who had lived through centuries of her people's history, a history that had shaped her into who she was today. "I suppose I am," Marcus said, his voice reflecting his surprise. He hadn't expected her to find him here. "I've always been curious about the past, about how things came to be." Lavara smiled faintly. "It's the past that shapes the future," she said. "But sometimes looking at the past can remind us of what we have yet to learn." She walked further into the room, her hands resting lightly on the edge of a large table covered in documents. For a moment, the two of them stood in silence, surrounded by the weight of centuries. Lavara's eyes moved across the room, taking in the vastness of the knowledge contained within. "I've often wondered," Lavara began, breaking the silence, "if our empire's history is truly one of glory, or if it's just a story we tell ourselves, a way of convincing ourselves that everything we've done has been for the good of the galaxy." He had never expected to hear such words from her. The queen, who had always seemed so sure of her position, was questioning everything. "Is it possible to ever truly know if what we do is right?" she asked quietly. Marcus thought for a moment before answering. "I think it's hard to know. No one can know the future, but we can only do what we believe is right and hope that it leads to something good." Lavara's eyes met his, and for a brief moment there was no barrier between them. There was no queen and no guard. Just two people trying to understand a world much bigger than themselves. "You're right," she said, her voice soft. "I've spent so much time focusing on the empire that I've forgotten about the people I'm ruling. It's the ones who live with the consequences of my choices." Marcus nodded, understanding more than she realized. He had seen it, the way power often separated those who held it from those who had to bear its weight. You're not the only one who feels the weight of their decisions, Marcus said quietly. We all carry it, whether we realize it or not. Lavara's eyes softened, and she walked closer to him. Sometimes, I wonder if I've made the wrong choices. But there's no turning back, is there? No, Marcus agreed. But there's always the chance to make things right, to try again. Lavara looked at him thoughtfully. Maybe. That's what I've been missing all along. It's a chance to try again. For the first time since they had met, Lavara looked like someone who had found peace. She didn't look like the queen anymore. She looked like a person, someone who was. Not defined by the title she carried, but by the choices she made. Thank you, Marcus, she said softly. For showing me that I don't have to be perfect. Marcus smiled gently. None of us are perfect. But we can always do better. They stood together in the quiet of the royal archives, the weight of the past surrounding them. For the first time, Marcus understood the true burden of the crown that Lavara wore. It wasn't just about ruling an empire. It was about carrying the weight of every decision, of every life affected by her choices. Lavara, too, understood something new. She had spent so many years trying to be the perfect ruler, trying to live up to expectations that were never truly hers to meet. But now, in this quiet moment with Marcus, she realized that being a leader didn't mean being flawless. It meant being willing to learn, to grow, and to admit when one had made a mistake. I think we both have a long way to go, Lavara said quietly, her voice filled with a kind of gentle honesty. I think we do. Marcus agreed, his heart full of a quiet kind of hope. And in that moment, neither of them felt so far apart. They were both just people, learning together, growing together, and finding their way in a galaxy that was much bigger than either of them could ever imagine. The days that followed were different. Marcus could feel it in the air, the subtle change in the way things were now. It was not just the quiet conversations he shared with Lavara or the moments of understanding that passed between them when they crossed paths. It was something deeper, something more permanent. The bond they had formed was becoming a thread that connected them. Weaving through the palace and into their daily lives, Marcus continued his duties as a guard, but now there was a quiet respect among the other palace staff when they saw him. He had always been the outsider, the one who didn't belong. But now he felt like he had a place. It was a small shift, but it was there, and it meant something. His relationship with Lavara had not only transformed the way he saw the palace, but also the way he saw himself. Lavara, too, was changing. He noticed it during the rare moments when she spoke openly with him. She was no longer just the queen, distant and untouchable. She was a person who questioned, who learned, and who wasn't afraid to show the cracks in her armor. It was something Marcus admired about her. The vulnerability she had shown him, the honesty, was not something he had ever expected from someone so powerful. One afternoon, as the sun began to set, Marcus found himself walking through the royal gardens. It was a peaceful place, filled with the scent of blooming flowers and the soft hum of the wind. He had been thinking about his journey since arriving at the palace how. In the beginning, he had felt small and insignificant, lost in a world far bigger than he had ever imagined. But now, he saw things differently, not just in his role as a guard, but as a person. And a lot of that growth had come from the unexpected connection he had with Lavara as he walked along the path. Lost in thought, he heard footsteps behind him. He turned to see Lavara approaching, her long robes flowing behind her like a river of gold. She was alone, her face serene but thoughtful. There was no entourage, no guards by her side, just her. Marcus, she said, her voice carrying a warmth he hadn't heard in it before. Would you mind walking with me? Of course, Your Majesty, Marcus replied, falling into step beside her. It was a quiet walk at first, neither of them saying anything. But as they reached the edge of the gardens, where the view of the distant mountains met the horizon, Lavara stopped. The sun was beginning to dip below the mountains, casting a soft golden light over the world below. It was beautiful. No, Lavara began, her voice gentle. I used to think that power meant never showing weakness, never letting anyone see that you're unsure, that you might not have all the answers. Marcus nodded, understanding the weight of her words. That's how most people see it, I think. The stronger you seem, the more people respect you. Lavara looked at him, her eyes thoughtful. That's what I thought. But you showed me something different, Marcus. You showed me that strength isn't just about power or control. Sometimes it's about letting yourself be vulnerable, about admitting when you don't have all the answers. Her words resonated. With him, he had always seen her as someone above it all, someone who had everything figured out. But now, he saw that she, too, had her doubts, her fears. And in that realization, he saw her not just as a queen, but as someone he could relate to. She wasn't perfect. She was human, just like him. You don't have to do everything alone, Marcus said softly. No one expects you to have all the answers. You just have to be willing to learn, to grow. Lavara smiled at him, the expression warm and genuine. I think that's something I've been missing for a long time. Thank you, Marcus, for reminding me of that. They stood there for a moment, looking out over the gardens, the quiet of the evening settling around them. It was a peaceful silence, the kind that didn't need to be filled with words. There was no need for pretenses, no need for the weight of royal duty. For just this moment, there were two people standing together, sharing something real. I never thought I'd find someone like you, Marcus, Lavara said after a while. Someone who sees past the title, who doesn't just bow to me because I'm the queen. Someone who can speak to me as a person, not a ruler. Marcus turned to look at her, his eyes meeting hers. I don't see you as a queen, Lavara. I see you as someone who is just as uncertain, just as human as I am. Lavara's eyes softened, and for a moment, Marcus saw the full weight of the years she had spent in power, the isolation she had endured. It had made her strong, yes, but it had also made her lonely. He realized that the queen who stood before him was not invincible. She was just like him, learning to navigate a world that often seemed too large, too overwhelming. You've taught me a lot, Marcus, Lavara said quietly. It's not just about strength, but about what it means to be a leader, to be humble, to admit when I'm wrong, and to trust others to help carry the weight. Marcus felt a warmth spread through him, a quiet pride. He hadn't come to Zernax expecting to change anything, but somehow he had. And in doing so, he had changed too. He had learned that even the most powerful rulers needed someone to confide in, someone who would help them see their own humanity. Lavara turned her gaze back to the horizon, where the sun was now dipping beneath the mountains, casting long shadows over the land. I think we both have a lot to learn, she said, her voice full of quiet reflection. But maybe that's the point. We don't have to have all the answers right away. We just have to be willing to try. Marcus nodded, the understanding between them deepening. We'll figure it out together. For the first time, Marcus truly believed it. They had come a long way from the ceremony where he had felt humiliated and small. Now, they stood together, not just as a queen and a guard, but as to people who had found understanding and respect in one another. It was a beginning, a small step toward something new. As they walked back through the gardens, side by side, Marcus felt a sense of hope. Not just for himself, but for the future, for a future where strength and vulnerability could coexist. Where learning and growing were as important as power and control. They didn't need to speak again. The silence between them was no longer awkward or heavy. It was comfortable, filled with the understanding that they had both come a long way. And as the night settled around them, Marcus knew that whatever the future held, it would be one they faced together.